Welcome and happy Friday, everyone. Hope your week has been fantastic. I am Dr. Nika White, the founder, lead principal consultant for NWC, and your host of Intentional Conversations VodCast and podcast. And we are delighted that you are here. We're just giving it a moment or two for the critical mass to build up for our audience, and then we'll jump in and get started. But if you've already connected with us, then feel free to go to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. That is always a treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented, not only just in the United States, but even outside of the US. And we have been expecting you. We know that we took a break last week for the Thanksgiving holiday. Hope you all had a great time of reflection and spent time with friends and family. I know that my family did, and it was a great break. But we have been excited all week long to get back to this community. We really enjoy being with you, and we enjoy hearing all of your great insights as we continue to bring this learning experience to the greater community so that we all can deepen our understanding and knowledge of all things diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, all the things, right? We have a great show that's planned for you today, and I can't wait for you to engage with our guest co-host, Yolanda Webb, and I will give a formal introduction momentarily. But I also want to acknowledge that we have a live community that joins us not only from the Zoom space, but also via LinkedIn Live. And so I want to acknowledge those folks right now who are connecting with us in that capacity. We know that many of you are listening in the background, maybe while you're multitasking, but if you're here part of Zoom, then cameras are always encouraged and welcome. We do appreciate smiling faces, but we also know that many of you are just here kind of in an auditory capacity. And in whatever means in which you are joining today, we are grateful to have you and look forward to building community with you throughout this hour. I want to give a special shout out to the NWC team who works tirelessly week in and week out to bring this virtual learning experience to the broader community. This is no small feat, and although the team makes it look incredibly easy, I do want to shout out the wonderful talent on the NWC team. So thank you so much, team, for all that you do. We at NWC believe in disability inclusion, and as such, we have closed caption that has been enabled for all of those who would gain value from having that available and accessible to you. So wanted to make sure I put that into your hearing. Let's be sure to use the chat today. That is our way of connecting us and helping us to get proximate to our time together as a community. And if you're on LinkedIn Live, then not to worry. You can go to the comment section, place your thoughts, your sentiments, your questions there. My team is watching it closely, and we're bringing all of those sentiments into our Zoom chat so that we can be one big happy community. Once again, Intentional Conversations VodCast, we're so glad you're here. Welcome. Let the conversation begin, and that is precisely what we're doing at this moment. If you're just tuning in, you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I am your host, Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. It's a couple observances into your hearing. Last week, I mentioned that we were on break for the Thanksgiving holiday, but on December 1st, Rosa Parks Day was recognized. And so I wanted to take a moment as part of this podcast community to certainly acknowledge Rosa Parks and all of her great contributions to society. Let us continue to make sure that we are educating ourselves on all of the historical legends that have created opportunities for us to live a more fruitful life. And remember that the fight is still not over. I also want to let you know that we are recognizing International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd. Again, that's past, but it's important for us to make sure that we are recognizing all of these national observances. Hopefully that was a day of reflection for you. We need to continue to stand in solidarity with people with disabilities. They deserve to live a life where they can contribute effectively to our communities and be gainfully employed. And so I want to make sure that we're uplifting that community. And this includes both disabilities that are visible and invisible. So keep that in mind as well. Now, December 10th is Human Rights Day. And so I certainly want to make sure that we spend some time thinking about that. Human Rights Day is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's observed annually across the globe on December 10th. It is a way to commemorate the anniversary of one of the world's most groundbreaking global pledges, which was all through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The 2024 theme for Human Rights Day is Our Rights, Our Future, right now. And so wanted to put that into your hearing. Hopefully you are gearing up to, again, be a part of this worldwide recognition and support of Human Rights Day. Now, LinkedIn is a resource that we often use. I am fortunate to be an instructor for LinkedIn Learning, and we have Navigating AI through an intersectional DEI lens that is free through December 31st. So you still have time to take advantage of that particular course. I cannot tell you the rapid growth of all of the different AI technologies that are showing up. And so it's not going away. They're very much a part of our day-to-day lives, but we also need to make sure that we're using them ethically and that we are aware of how biases can certainly show up within AI tools. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of that free resource that's available to you through the end of the month. I am also super excited to share that January the 6th is when the paperback version of my book, Baby Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, will release. And so you have an opportunity to engage in that resource if you don't have it already. And I'm glad about this because it's going to give us a chance to build up some additional momentum around this great resource tool. And if you haven't already, I do encourage you to please go to Amazon, write that review for me. Those reviews are critically important to authors, and in advance, I appreciate your support. Another LinkedIn Learning course that's available for you is Addressing Hate Speech in the Workplace. We must know the difference between free speech and hate speech, and that is now available. It's actually my latest release, and so I continue to put that into your hearing as a resource that you may find valuable. Now, our final intentional conversations for 2024, not final in general, but just for this year, will be December the 13th. We're going to be taking a break on the final couple weeks of the year, actually. We'll be returning on January the 10th. And so that gives us a chance to evolve our programming, refine some of our initiatives to continue to optimize this learning experience for our community. And so we hope that you will join us in 2025, but wanted to go ahead and make sure that you are marking your calendars to know that if you show up here after December 13th, that you're going to be maybe alone, but not to worry because we will be returning in 2025. And speaking of 2025, I'm super excited because that will represent the 5th year anniversary of Intentional Conversations. Yay, 5. I'm excited about that. And this is going to be something that we will celebrate all year long in 2025, including some special reunion intentional conversation episodes that will occur in addition to our Friday sessions that are will continue week after week. And so I just want to make sure that I go ahead and plant that seed with you. Stay tuned for more details, but yay, 5 for us. That's no small feat, and I'm super excited about that milestone. Now, I want to tell you what you have to look forward to as we round out intentional conversations for 2024. On Friday, December 13th, next Friday, again, our last intentional conversations of the year, we have the pleasure of welcoming Valda Valborn to that conversation. And in that, we are going to be addressing how to deal with the current climate, impacts to her personally as a Haitian American, and holding space for healing and safety in a world where it feels unsafe to be a woman of color. So I hope that you will join us for Valda Valborn's conversation on December the 13th. Now, it gives me great pleasure to give a formal introduction of today's guest co-host, and her name is Yolanda Webb, and I so look forward to being in community with her today. I often will give a full reading of the guest co-host bio because it's critically important for you all to know how in which our guest co-hosts are showing up to the conversation in terms of their accolades and credentials. Yolanda Webb is a philanthropist, public policy nerd, her words, not mine, advocate and subject matter expert on human behavior, social impact, community engagement, corporate social responsibility, equity, inclusion, and how to create diverse and accessible environments. Yolanda is an accomplished professional recognized with numerous awards as a visionary leader and strategist with extensive executive leadership and an entrepreneurial background. So you know what to do at this time if you've been with us. Find those accolades, those credentials, those words of just welcome. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can bring Yolanda into the spotlight along with me. So I'm going to add her right now. And I am so glad you're here. Thank you so very much. Before I release you, Yolanda, to greet this audience in your own way, we do have a tradition here at NWC, and that is that we always invite our guest co-host who is part of their greeting to share something with us that we would not know from hearing your bio, which we just did, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Well, first of all, thank you. You touched on in your overview things that are near and dear to my heart. Of course, disability inclusion is one of those things that's near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally. And the one thing I think people wouldn't really know about me based on my bio, and I tell people this and they go, "Get out of here." I twirled. I was a majorette and twirled for Jimmy Carter's inauguration, and so yes,
Oh,
that old,
wow.
but also was very honored to be a part of that inauguration of Jimmy Carter. He is one of my favorite presidents, and so no, I don't include that in my bio, but it is one of my little claims to fame.
No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you were joining the conversation today, by the way, from Denver, Colorado. You did say that it's relatively cold, but that the temperature is going to rise around midday for you. And so wanted to
Yes,
acknowledge that for our
yes.
community. So let's jump right in because there's so much that I want to be able to unpack with you and to have this community to hear in terms of your experience and your insight. And I want to start first with you just giving us a little bit of your journey to the space and place that you're in now. So give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. I started my career some 30 years ago as a behavior specialist working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that was during the time when folks with IDD were in very large institutions. And I had the pleasure of working with both a psychologist and a psychiatrist who really taught me how to be observant of human behavior and what human behavior communicates in that space. And so in that learning and in the journey, I have taken all of that to really try to understand human behavior. And so moving up the ladder in terms of working with people with disabilities, I really focused on leadership. I was part of a task force about 20 years ago in Cincinnati that worked to deinstitutionalize folks and move them into community and really saw the whole not in my backyard from people that didn't want individuals with disabilities to move into community, right? Or even to have jobs in community. And so my advocacy work, my fight, and the fight that, continues today under a different umbrella in terms of terms, we call it DEI, but it started 30 years ago, right? Working with individuals with disabilities. And it wasn't necessarily just about race, but it was about that person's seen or unseen disability and that inclusion into the larger society. And so that has really shaped the journey that I am on now today, because I see that while we fought a really good fight, the fight continues. We
Yeah, the
still
fight.
have a lot of work
Yes.
to do. Yes.
Yes. I definitely expressed that in the opening when I talked about Human Rights Day. We still have a lot of fighting to do to continue to provide parity for those communities who are often left out of the consideration set. So I appreciate you bringing that to today's conversation. I also want to just acknowledge that the timing of you being here with us, Yolanda, is ideal because of, again, the human rights recognition that's coming up on the 10th, as well as the people with disabilities acknowledgement that I mentioned at the top of the hour. And I love that you brought to the conversation that this is not something that's new. While we often think about this body of work as diversity, equity, equity, and inclusion. And by the way, I'm trying my best to actually say those words because those words carry so much power instead of using the acronym these days, which is being weaponized. But when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, in essence, a lot of it has everything to do with just valuing human difference, understanding human behavior, and allowing that understanding to, position us to create opportunities for success for all, in recognition of those differences. And so, you're so right. This work has begun so much longer, and there's a lot of people that are part of the people with disabilities community that often will say, what about us? You're leaving us out of this conversation. So I'm so glad that today we are amplifying that particular community, because as I said in the beginning, when we talk about people with disabilities, it's not just visible disabilities, it's also the invisible disabilities that we have to consider as well. And probably every single one of us can identify at least a handful, probably many more, but at least a handful, including maybe ourselves. I'll raise my hand on that, where there is some type of disability that either is seen or unseen. And so I'm
Yeah,
grateful that
that
we're
is.
having this conversation today. Yes, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, I was around and really was involved and had a hand in helping when the ADA was revised and it was updated.
Yes.
There was this whole pushback on from businesses about buttons on doors and, from communities about curb cuts on sidewalks. I mean,
Yes.
there was just a real pushback around that. But guess what? Moms using strollers, people on bikes use curb cuts
Yeah.
today. We all push the button to go into buildings, right? And so
We all benefit.
we are
Yes.
all benefited. And so what I want people to understand as they weaponize DEI, we will all benefit from the outcomes that we can achieve and accomplish, like equity. We will all benefit. We're too close right now, we can't see that. But if we could use the example of the ADA and what it required, simple things like those curb cuts and buttons on doors, how they benefited all of humanity, then we can look forward to the work that's being done now to benefit all of us in the future, rather than trying to weaponize this work. And I did want to touch on the Rosa Parks thing, because Rosa Parks is near and dear to my heart. She lived in Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. But a couple of days ago was also the anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. And
Mm,
when we think about the work that Rosa Parks started and what came
yes.
out of that, as we're facing an unknown future with this recent election,
Yes.
I want to remind us what the civil rights movement taught us in terms of our economic power,
Oh,
around
yeah.
equity. What Rosa Parks did was about equity. She didn't want to give up her seat because she was as human as anybody else on that bus, and she didn't deserve to give up her seat, right?
Right.
But what it taught us is that we have so much economic power that we aren't using. And the Montgomery bus boycott shut down the buses in Montgomery. And when they realized the hit that their purses and pocketbooks took, they integrated those buses. And I just want to remind us that we already have a blueprint. We already have a plan that works. We just have to use it.
Yes, that is such astute commentary. I appreciate that. And you also have someone in the community that's a fellow Montgomery, Alabama native, Kenyatta. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but thank you so much. And she mentions that the transportation system still hasn't been rebuilt since then. And so you're right, the economic power we have cannot be denied. And
Right.
as I think about even some of the present day news that has hit the airwaves regarding Walmart and so many others who have pulled back, rolled back, their
Yes.
DEI efforts. Many are making the statement that let's not spend our dollars there. If they can't hire us and can't respect the dignity of people of color and all the other dimensions of diversity, then we need to respond with our purse strings, right? And so
Yes.
I appreciate you bringing that to today's conversation. I think that it is critically important for us to realize that we do have power. Something else that comes to mind for me while we're talking about Rosa Parks Parks is that, every time I get a chance to reflect on her life, her legacy, and how she so bravely made an amazing message that still to this day resonates with many, is I think about her quiet spirit. There is a quote, and I'm going to probably butcher this, and so I apologize to the originator of this quote, but it's something along the lines of, a lion does not always roar. And when I think about Rosa Parks, her strength, she didn't roar. She just sat in that seat and refused to move. And so I got chills actually saying that. But the reason I wanted to bring that to the conversation is because we all have to figure out, what does fighting look like for us, right? It can look vastly different from one person to the next. And we have to give ourselves agency and permission to think about, how do we want to show up in these moments where there's such social complex issues that we all need to be paying attention to and weighing in on, and what does that look like for us? Not everyone's fight is going to look the same, and I think that's okay. And so thank you for giving me a moment just to reflect on Rosa Parks and that particular sentiment that comes up for me when I often think about her and her life.
Well, it's for me, she focused her attention on what was important to her, right? One of the
Yes,
things that we were going to
yes,
talk about today was attention bias, right?
yes,
And
absolutely.
when we talk about fighting the good fight and how do we fight, right? I oftentimes I want to remind people that we're in a period of real distraction. They,
Yes.
I say they, but the opposition to diversity, equity, and inclusion, um,
Mm,
the distraction is to try to make it something that it's not. And
yes.
when we engage in those conversations about, here's what DEI stands for, that's a distraction.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that attention bias is being very selective about what you are going to focus on. And if
Yes.
we focus on doing the work, if we focus on helping allies to understand the outcomes of the work, right? Rather than focusing on the rhetoric that is out there, then we can become successful, but we get sucked into the distractions. And I tell folks, the election is a distraction. That it's distracting us from our humanity. It's distracting us from doing the work of bringing our communities, our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our worlds together.
Yes.
It's distracting, and we get sucked in to the distraction. And I don't want us to get sucked into the distraction. So I'm trying to teach folks, what you selectively focus your attention on is what will manifest, is what's going to be the outcome of the work, right? And so if we
Yeah.
selectively focus on just doing the work, don't focus on the rhetoric, because the rhetoric is always going to be out there.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. This is so timely for so many reasons, obviously, that I think all of us can identify with. And I specifically have been looking forward to this conversation because, like many other practitioners who care deeply about this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, justice, accessibility, all the things, right? We have been grappling with, how do we show up to this moment when we know that the acronym of DEI has been heavily weaponized, and that it has become a distraction, but it's also a distraction that has to be addressed in some capacity in order to be able to keep doing the work. And so, people have been really, contemplating, do I move away from that language? Do I stick with that language? Do I reimagine the language? And while I think that at least most of those folks who are in my community have gravitated to the number one mission being, let's just continue doing the work by all means necessary, it does require us thinking about how we may do the work a little bit differently, how we need to evolve the work. And so I love being able to engage in this conversation around attention bias. It's not something that we hear and talk about often, but again, it's very timely now. So I just want us to really unpack this in a way that helps this community to deepen their understanding of it. You've given us a high level definition of how you define attention bias. I want us to just expound on that and tell us how attention bias can affect our perceptions, our reactions, especially in emotionally charged situations in the workplace and then in society right now when we think about the election results, and what's to come at the top of the year. How does it influence our decision making? Just expound for us, if you will, please, Yolanda.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that I practice is mindfulness, and mindfulness is about
Yeah.
being present, right?
Yes.
It's operating in the present moment. And attention bias is this selective perception that we have of the environment around us. And when we, for example, when we go into our workplaces, you ask yourself, what's the first thing that I focus on when I get to work, right? Am I
Mhm.
focusing on what the day's gossip is? And so I'm going to stop by the person who knows
Yeah.
what's going on, right? I've already decided what my attention will be focused on for the day. And so that's going to cloud my perception of the rest of the day at work. Rather than saying, I'm going to go in today and my attention is going to be on the outcome of this job that I have to do. And so we have to really understand, what is it that we are focused on? What are we focusing on? And it's a really hard thing to do, but I give my clients an exercise that they can practice, and it's a really tough exercise. At the end of the day, when you go to bed at night, recall in your head from the moment that you laid down till you arose that morning, every single thing you did, right? What that does is it helps you to redirect your attention. You get to say,
Mhm.
but it's a really hard thing to do because we as humans aren't that focused. You know,
Yeah.
we take in 90,000 pieces of information on any given day. It is what we choose because attention is a choice, just like intention is a choice.
Mm.
Attention is a choice, right? What do we choose to focus on? So when I say they've weaponized DEI, is because they have behavioral experts that can say it creates a distraction, right? And I saw somebody put in the chat, the work is the work. It is. And when I said 30 years ago, the movement to deinstitutionalize people with disabilities,
Right.
that was the DEI movement. That was DEI. That was inclusion.
Was.
That was belonging, right? So it doesn't matter what we call this. And I want people to not get distracted about what we call this, because putting a label on it, somebody is always going to disagree with the label. What they cannot disagree with is the work. And the work is the work of humanity. The work is the work of relationship. The work is the work of kindness and love and fairness. That's the work. You can't ignore the work. Even, there's a passage in the Bible, and like you, I'm going to probably butcher this, but it talks about even evil men give good things to their children, right? And so they
Oh, yeah.
know what good is. So you can't debate. So the debate right now, Nika, is not that DEI is wrong. The debate is the letters DEI.
Yes, exactly.
That's under attack, right? No one is saying that we shouldn't be nice human beings, fair and equitable. They're not saying that. They're saying
Right.
DEI is racist. But how is DEI racist if what DEI is kindness to my fellow man, is equity and the just treatment of my fellow man? So nobody wants to say that. And so when I say don't get distracted and focus our attention on the work, the bias is that we selectively focus on the things that take us off course, right? And we don't want any other perspective to invade that. And so the folks that say DEI is racist, they don't want any other perspective. They want, their attention is focused on that. We will never combat that. What we can do is continue to do this work to show that, it's what Michelle Obama said, that we take the higher road.
Yes, when they go low, we go high.
Yes.
There's so much to unpack with the sound bites that you just provided. And by the way, we do often extract sound bites, as replays to share just bits of what's been discussed on Intentional Conversations, and we put it out on social media. And I am just thinking to myself, this whole thing is it's a soundbite because there's so much goodness in what you're sharing. And I just want to process out loud some of what's coming up for me as I listen to you talk about attention bias. First and foremost is, so I love intentionality. My first book was, of course, this is called The Intentional Conversations. My first book was The Intentional Inclusionist. But I think there's so much power in intentionality, right? And so I love any variation of that word. And I often will say that being intentional, you can't be passive about it. It is very directed and actionable, and it's a choice. And so when you said today that just like intention is a choice, attention is a choice, that really resonated with me. And you're so right. How many times do we find ourselves stating negative things about whether it's working out, whether it's, just whatever it is, right? Our fitness, and then we have to quickly catch ourselves because we're speaking that into existence. We're just manifesting that negativity around it. And it's becoming a distraction. So that in and of itself was like precious gold that you have delivered to us. And then, when you talked about how the work is the work, and the work is not DEI acronym, the work is humanity, relationships, kindness. Yes. And I just think that was worth just amplifying. And I will tell you, Yolanda, and I've even socialized this with this community, and many of you who've been with us for quite some time, you will say, yep, I remember on occasions where Nika has mentioned that. I have very much been of the persuasion that, nope, I'm not changing the name of it. I'm still going to say diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm still going to say DEI because we've gone through all the different ways of, referring to this body of work. And every single time it feels like they win, the opposition wins because they just weaponize whatever it is. And so, no, I'm not going to give them that satisfaction. But if the focus, which is what you're teaching us, is directly on the work is the work and the work should continue, it should not matter how we refer to it. It should not matter that we perceive that they are winning as long as the work is getting done. Because if the work is getting done, they aren't winning. So this is like a revelation for me. Yeah. And while I do believe in being strategic, I do believe in playing chess and not checkers. And so as I have been even thinking about the evolution of my business and the language that I'm using, it is all to position myself to continue to optimize doing the work. And so if that means that based upon certain audiences, that I don't use that acronym, and I said at the beginning that I have really tried of late to not use the acronym because there's so much power in the words of diversity, equity, and inclusion that I think is amplified versus saying DEI because of all the opposition. But I think that it certainly is positioning me to be a lot more open to making sure that my attention on doing the work is so focused, because that's what I choose to do. I don't choose to give time and energy to the negativity of those folks who have dug their heels in to say, this has no value, because you're not going to move those folks, right? You're not going to move them. So it's a distraction. And that's how I'm defining distraction. If you can't change something, you're not going to move it. Why keep giving energy and time to it?
Exactly.
We focus a lot on the importance of like time management when we're trying to go after something that's really important, but energy management is just as important. And I don't want that negativity around me.
Yes, it is.
Anyway.
When I was a kid growing up, my dad, they both my parents came from Mobile, Alabama, did the Great Migration north. My father was assistant principal for a high school. He was a math and science, physics teacher, educator. My mother was a social worker. But my parents used to say something to us, when we were kids growing up. They would say, in your lifetime, you are going to be a Negro the N word, you're going to be Afro-American, you're going to be African-American, you're going to be Black, but you're always going to be yourself.
Oh,
You can't
yes.
change that, right? And no matter
Yes.
what label anybody ever puts on you, you're always going to be you. And so stay you. And that's what when I teach this, when I talk about this, is please understand that no matter what the label, external label is that we give to something, the thing still is what it is, right? And the work that we are doing to educate people about our humanity and about us as human beings, and that we are our brother's keeper, comes from that perspective, right? The work is what it is, and we do the work. I have this saying, and I have it up in here in my office, and it says the opposite of cowardice, of courage, is not cowardice, but compromise.
Mm. That's good. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is not. I'm more of a coward when I say, yep, DEI is wrong or racist, and I just go along with you because I'm compromising and I want to be a part of the crowd, the in crowd, right? So
Right.
it's much more courageous to stand out on your own and alone than it is to go along with the crowd.
Oh,
And, and so
absolutely.
and so,
Absolutely. That's convenient. To go along with the crowd is just convenient, right? It's
absolutely,
complacency. It's just, yes, it's not
absolutely,
caring. And we don't
absolutely.
need any more people that don't care. We need people that care and care deeply.
Yes, yes, we do. And that's what I have seen from our recent election is, this 51 some odd percent of the vote that Donald Trump received. And I wrote a blog post on it called Referendum Fear. What I saw was not people that agreed with his humanity. They didn't agree with his humanity, right? They know all the things that's been done, to whether it's to other women, whether it's been to our brothers and sisters south of the border. They know that, and they know in
Yes.
their hearts that part of their humanity is screaming that is wrong. But what they
Yeah.
did was they compromised
They compromise.
out of fear.
They compromise out of fear, but let's get even more explicit, out of fear of the perception that power was going to be lost or was going to
That's
have to
right.
be shared.
Yes.
And that took precedent over
Yes.
all of the other things.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. It took precedence over. And I say to people, okay, so if he got 51% of the vote, if you look around in your own circle, half of the people that you know voted for him. Let's not
Yeah,
get
I
the data
know.
wrong. Let's not screw the data up. Let's
You're
not get it
right.
wrong. That's what it means. You take it from this sort of macro level down to this
Right.
micro level. You look in your own
Yes.
circle of people, and
Yes.
you know that's what those numbers trend the same way.
Right. That number doesn't get to be that number because of an
Exactly.
isolated outlier group, right?
No,
These are
no, it
folks that
doesn't.
are in our places of worship. These are folks that are in our families, showing up to our Thanksgiving, Christmas, holiday dinners. These are folks that
Exactly.
we work with. These are folks that we
Exactly.
trust, that we're in community with. They're our neighbors.
Absolutely. They're our friends.
100%.
They're our friends. And
100%.
they're going to be
Yes.
back in our faces today, tomorrow, and next week.
Absolutely.
They are our
Absolutely.
friends. Yeah, they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've heard some people say that they are cutting off those individuals once they know that their vote went that way. And I have grappled with that because I'm like, that's the way to coexist. We're gonna have to coexist. You're just going to ignore, 50+% of the population in the US? No. But I want to go back to the source that you referenced to see if my team can actually, yeah, 92%. I'm with you on that. I'm part of that 92%. But I want to go back to referendum fears, I believe the name of the blog post. And so I'm going to see if my team can actually source that and place it into the chat so that we can have that as a reference. And thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. I think something else that's been really important around this time that aligns with this attention bias that you're speaking of, and with, really understanding that the work is humanity, relationships, kindness, justice, all those things, is the opportunity that we have been forced to really get hyper focused about our own individual values, right? I think that has been really critical because before we really can decipher how we want to show up to this moment, we have to be very much in tune with what do I value at my core, right? And I think that's critically important. So we're going to be shifting in a little bit because I want to give this audience an opportunity to engage with you directly, Yolanda, if they choose. And you can do so if you're part of our Zoom community by using the raise hand feature. And if your hand is raised, I will invite you to be added to the spotlight if your camera is on. And I will invite you to unmute yourself to share your questions or curiosities, or just comments, at that time. If you desire to have your question presented on your behalf, you can place that into the chat and we will be looking at that. If you're on LinkedIn Live, we have not forgotten about you. Go to the comment section, place your questions there, and we will bring that to the discussion as well. So while you all are percolating, I want to go to this next question for Yolanda. Now, we have set the tone for what attention bias is, why it's important, how this really relates to the climate that we are experiencing and navigating right now. But what I feel like a lot of people hold to is how do we make this practical? And I am big on the practicality of this work. And so I would love for you to share with us some strategies or techniques that can be employed to minimize the negative effects of attention bias and to keep us focused. And so I know that you said there's an exercise that you give a lot of your clients. And so we appreciate that. But are there any other strategies and tactics and tools that you can share with us that moves us from to the application of what you're sharing with us today?
I read somewhere, Nika, that goodwill is measurable, right? It's a measurable activity. And if you
Yeah.
start your day saying how much goodwill, can I provide to my fellow man, today? And so whether that's at the workplace or if you stop at the gas station, right? Do you say good morning, right? Your attention can shift from an internal perspective to an external perspective, right? And so you can use that as a very tangible asset, a tool, and in terms of how do I showcase goodwill? Goodwill is selective attention. So that's one tool that you can use. The second tool
Mhm.
is looking at your own actions, right? I did a leadership training yesterday, and one of the things that we talked about was how leaders should focus on implementing really small, scalable acts for themselves, right? Things like I used to do this for a number of my own teams. I would create birthday cards for all of my March birthdays or all of my December birthdays, right? That those are small acts of goodwill. It refocuses our attention. And guess what? The folks that don't agree with me or don't like my politics or any of those things, they now see my humanity, right? The whole point is getting people to see your humanity, that you remember who they are. One of the things that I really loved about Barack Obama was the fact that when he went into the White House every day, he would stop even to say hello to the janitor, and
Yes, he did.
he would remember like one little thing about that person, right? Like, hey, how's that grandson's basketball game, right? People just want to know that you recognize their humanity. So very small acts are measurable and they're scalable in terms of attention, redirecting your attention. So much of our attention is internal and it's about me, right?
Yeah,
Rather than about being external,
yeah,
recognizing someone else's need. A leader who has a person that comes in late every day, rather than looking at the tardiness, how about have an intentional conversation that says, how can I help you? Right. And then
right.
what if you discover that person's in a domestic violence situation? What if you discover that they don't have a car, they missed the bus, all of those things, right? You refocus your intention, your attention on how can you help the person, right? It's an external value that you now have rather than on your internal value, which says, I'm the manager, right? I'm in charge and they're breaking the rules by being late every single day. That's a tool. Focus externally. I think the other tool is embrace your vulnerability and your authenticity, right?
Absolutely.
Be willing to say, you know what, I screwed that up. I don't know.
Mhm.
And I got that wrong, right? So I think you redirect your attention, is to really say, I don't understand. Help me to
Right.
understand better, right? And
Yeah.
then the I think the final one of those is to think of things from what I call this helicopter perspective, right? Expand your view. Look at different
Mhm.
news sources, right? Read different books. That's how you change your attention on something, is you get a different perspective. And so I think those are some real tools that we can use to help change our attention away from the things that we always focus on.
Yeah. So much about this is rich, and it's bringing my attention to a learning path and learning series that relates to storytelling that my firm is going to be releasing relatively soon, and I believe that as I hear you talk about attention bias and avoiding distractions, I believe that part of our ability to show up in a way that centers humanity is through the storytelling, receiving stories, sharing stories, that are very authentic, that demonstrates that level of vulnerability that you talked about. And I also believe that those stories help us to really lean into this whole idea of let my focus be very much on the attention of the individual, right? Than on some of the distractions that could be happening during that moment. And even the example that you gave of someone being late, I mean, I have a real life example of years ago where I had to coach a manager with a large manufacturing company through a very similar situation. He said, I have this employee that performs incredibly well. She's a great asset. There's just one thing. She is habitually late. And I said, well, why is she late? Oh, I don't know. Well, how about asking her, engaging her to find out? And then in a follow-up conversation, he said, well, Dr. White, I engaged her. You will not believe this. And I said, well, try me. I bet I will. He said that she was recently separated, divorced, and she has 3 young kids. All 3 of those kids are in different schools, different daycare situations, and that she literally had to travel all, around the city just for drop off,
Yeah,
and she did not feel she did not have the psychological safety of disclosing that information so that she could be supported and helped. And
right.
so the solution was quick and easy. Oh, no problem. Let's let your start time for the day be at 8:30 instead of 8, and then you'll just
Exactly.
stay 30 minutes later on the back end.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And his mind was blown. He was
Right.
like, I didn't even think to engage. I just thought maybe
Right.
she just was, being disrespectful and not just really, trying to comply with what our rules and our protocol was.
Well,
So when we pay attention, we notice things. And through those
mm,
observations, it should spark us to want to hear stories, share stories, invite personal narratives to be able to help solve for them in a way where people still can show up, where
right.
there's full opportunity for success.
That's
And
right.
so I
Yeah.
am I am so loving this conversation today, Yolanda.
Well, and I really appreciate that story because it happens more often than not that leaders, people with titles, don't pay attention, right? I
Yeah,
have a client right now, their workforce is on the verge of walking out. And one of the things that I noticed was the fact that these people had been grumbling and complaining when I did some key informant interviews. This wasn't new to,
right.
it wasn't even new to management, the things that they were asking for, but management chose to focus its attention elsewhere. And it led to this. It never has to lead to this, right? Their bias was on output for the work. We've got to get our product out the door. Well, but your staff, your employees are unhappy because this is backbreaking work for them. You're not paying attention. They've asked you for various options in terms of doing the work, but you're still looking at what our output is going to be rather than what the outcome is going to be. And so those are two different things. They were looking at output.
Yeah.
Employees were looking at outcome. And so I think you have to, and your story shows that when people refocus their attention on the things that matter. There was a book out, and I think it really did us an injustice. It was called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff.
Oh, I remember that book. Yes.
We have to
I
sweat
have a
the
book on my
small
bookshelf
stuff.
as I
I
look
do
to my
too.
bookshelves. Yeah.
I do too. But we have to sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
The
Don't sweat the
details are,
small stuff, and it's all small stuff.
it's all
Yeah.
small stuff, right? It's all small stuff. And we have to, we have to focus on the small stuff because that's where the details are. That's where the work is. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that output versus outcome and just the
Yes.
distinction between the two. Yes, and Jeanette and our community shared assume the best and then have the conversation to clarify whatever we find ourselves observing behaviors that are maybe against what the protocol may be, or that are not to our liking. Yes, assume positive intent, but then ask those questions so that we can then clarify and then address where we may need to. Um, this is so good. Okay, so I want to go to the next question, and this is really about creating a purpose-driven culture. And so, what strategies, Yolanda, do you often give intentional leaders to help them drive towards creating a more purpose-driven culture within their teams?
You have to honor everybody's voice, first of all, right? Decisions are often made. And one of the things I used to tell my leadership is that the final decision should rest with you, but the decision making shouldn't rest with you,
Of
right?
course.
All of your people, from the person that is new on board or in that entry level position, they all should have a voice in any of that decision making. Yes, as the leader, you're supposed to purposefully make that final decision, but your team has to have input. That's one of the ways you create a purpose-driven culture, right? My favorite book is Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life. I love,
Hmm.
love, love that book, right? And part of what that message is around this intentionality that your show is based on, right? How do you set that? How do you set the tone for when you go into work, right? For me, purpose driven is I I already know when I start my day what I want my outcomes to be, not just for the people I serve, but also for my employees, right? I want my team to have a great day as well. I want them to think at the end of the day, and I used to say this all the time to them, when we turn the light off, if we've helped one person, if we've touched one life and made one life better, we have been successful. And
Very
and
successful.
and to understand that creating purpose-driven cultures isn't about people pleasing on the outside of that culture. It's about helping your team internally to get to the outcomes that you want for the people externally, right? And so you if your team is unhappy internally, you are not going to get to those outcomes externally. And so
Right.
creating those purpose-driven cultures absolutely means including all voices at the table. I don't care where they fall on that organizational chart, right? Everybody deserves to be heard. All voices have to be heard. I think it also means sometimes the paperwork can wait because sometimes people just need you to hear them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
and to also look at choosing to evaluate culture differently. Performance evaluations is not an evaluation of your culture.
Of course.
Creating
Yes.
a purpose-driven culture means that you evaluate your culture. You don't just evaluate people in isolation based on a
Yeah.
job function, right? You have to evaluate your culture as well. That creates a purpose-driven atmosphere for people.
Yeah, so much goodness in what you just shared. You brought us back to the output versus outcome. And I love what you said about the final decision rests with the leader, but the decision-making process does not. That requires team input. I often talk about that, Yolanda, by, describing the difference between inclusive decision making, which is getting that team input, versus consensus decision making. There is
Right.
not many situations where you can operate off of the end goal being consensus decision making because people are different, right?
That's right.
But that inclusive decision making is exactly what you're talking about in terms of seeking input and then leveraging that to inform where that particular leader who holds the final call may land. And so I appreciate that. I also love just this amplification of if you can make a difference in one life, then that is significant, because I believe that oftentimes we try to judge our efforts, our output, or outcome based upon something that's macro. And the micro milestones and efforts are just equally important. And so when you mentioned earlier about the goodwill, taking stock of our goodwill, I put a comment into the chat to say, goodwill journal, is that a good idea for you to kind of just keep track of all those things?
Yes, it is.
Because yeah, I believe that sometimes if we don't take inventory of the goodwill, the micro goodwill things that are happening on a daily basis, that we feel like maybe we aren't making impact, and that can be just the momentum we need to have greater traction to go after something that may be bigger and loftier, right? So
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, when I did this leadership training yesterday, one of the ladies had been to my home office, and she raised her hand and she said, I just got to tell you, Yolanda walks this walk. She has a gratitude jar that she comes home every day at the end of the day, and she puts one thing in the jar that she's been grateful for the day. And that helps me to stay grounded and connected to the work that I do, right?
Yeah,
Have I made a difference? And if I can say that there's one thing that I am grateful for in terms of the difference that I have made, and it doesn't have to be at work. It could be at the grocery store in the checkout
of
line, right?
course.
It could be that. It could be a conversation that I have with a bank teller who may be having a bad day or something, right? Yeah, I put that in my gratitude jar because that says that the work that I do has an impact on somebody else's life. That's also an outcome.
Mm. Yeah. Someone in our community, part of our teams, Amy Pecoraro, mentions that she keeps a gratitude journal that she fills out nightly, 5 things she's grateful for, and that it has definitely helped her to find small things that make a difference in her life. And I agree
Yeah.
with that. But I have to say this. I think that a gratitude journal or gratitude jar can be different from a goodwill journal, because I can be grateful for something that I had no part in, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. But what I want to bring a distinction to is that when you were talking about the importance of recognizing the
Yeah.
goodwill, those are
Mhm.
things that we are doing that maybe we are also grateful that we were brought to that place and had that opportunity. But I think that it has a slightly different outcome than maybe just
Yes.
acknowledging all the ways in which we're just grateful for maybe the things that have happened or occurred for us. And so
Yeah.
I
Those are
love the
small.
idea of both.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I
I
love
love
the
that. Yeah.
idea. That is so good. Okay, so we're going to soon run out of time. I want to try to get one more question in, and I want to give you a chance to certainly kind of, just close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate for you. I want
Sure.
to talk about intentional leadership and self-awareness, because the two are very much aligned. So, how can leaders, again, we're going to get to the practicality of some strategies and tools and tactics, but how can leaders cultivate self-awareness to align their actions with their intentions within their leadership role?
For me, again, it goes back to mindfulness, being
Mm,
present, right? And I call it being in the light. There are days when you
yeah,
get up and the world just seems really gray. And then there are
yeah.
days when the world just seems really light, right?
Mm,
That's when you're in the present moment. And I believe that when we are present, we make better decisions. We make more
I agree.
intentional decisions when we are a part of the light. And so I think a couple of things that I do is I practice meditation. because I want myself to stay grounded, right? My
Mm,
faith is important to me. I said, of course, about the
mm,
gratitude jar, but I also do a faith journal. I
mhm.
journal every single day, and and it's not a diary. It's a journal.
Yeah,
It's about how do I feel and how do I want to feel. One of the other things that I think is a really powerful tool in terms of just this being very intentional, and I do this with my granddaughters every morning. We do I ams, right?
yeah.
Um, and I write to them every single morning. I send them a text. They don't live here in Denver with me. They live in Memphis, but I send them a text every morning, and I say, let's claim our I ams. And I am smart, I am wise, I am beautiful, all the I ams. I am strong. And I think that's intentional. You have to decide who you are in order to show up in the world. If you want to be a good leader, I am a good leader. If you want to be a great leader, I am a great leader, right? But you have to be intentional, and you have to be self-aware about where is it that I need to create space for growth. For me
Yeah.
personally, I have had to take a step back and say, you know what, I need to grow better in this area. Sometimes we don't want to be that harsh with ourselves, but we can only grow when we are that self-aware, when we are that vulnerable, even to ourselves, right? But the first place we
Mhm,
show up vulnerable is to ourselves, is to the person
mhm.
staring back at you in the mirror, right? Your vulnerability doesn't matter a hill of beans to other people until you can show up and be vulnerable with yourself, right? But oftentimes our ego gets in the way of that vulnerability, right? We'd rather stand in the mirror and say, I don't know who they think I am, but I'm right, right? No, 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 no. We need to stand in the mirror and say, girl, I think I made a really bad decision here,
Yeah,
right? And I'm
yeah.
sorry that I made that decision. And here's what I really was trying to do. I mean, that vulnerability starts with ourselves, and then we can show that vulnerability to the world. That is how you show up as a very intentional and self-aware leader. You have to start with yourself. Leadership, if you can't lead yourself, quite honestly, you can't lead anybody else.
So true.
Yeah.
I think that is a beautiful and very appropriate note to end on. And Yolanda, I just want to take this opportunity to extend great gratitude to you for the way in which you've shown up beautifully, sharing insights with our community. I know that I have learned a lot, and I'm sure this community has as well. I want to give you the final 15 seconds or so to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate for you. But before I turn it over, I want to thank this community for also showing up. We appreciate you. We hope to see you again next week for our final Intentional Conversations episode of 2024. Yolanda.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, and I thank your community for having me and sharing and allowing me to share my voice. I do have a book coming out. I write under the pen name. I have 5 books already out. My pen name is Lonnie Webb, Loni, Lonnie Webb, and my new book is The Power of Ouch: Lessons of Hope from Hurt. And it is talking about just what we talked about today. How do you move beyond those things that have hurt you, and learn those lessons so that you can move on and become your most powerful self?
I love that. I love that. Lonnie Webb, we've placed actually that pin name into the chat. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, safe
You,
weekend. We look forward to seeing you all again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast. Thank you.
thank you
Bye-bye.
all. Bye bye.